Good morning to everyone. Thank you for joining. Uh, this is one in our series of DBIO engagement workshops. And today we have, and this is essentially a monthly series run by the Division of Biological Physics of the American Physical Society. It's a monthly series run by the Engagement Committee, and we have a lot of different topics that we cover. And I would encourage you to go to our DBIO Engage website where you can actually find recordings of past workshops as well. And these include everything from job hunting to how to attend the March meeting to everything that is potentially of use to you. And of course, all of this is not possible without exceptional volunteer panelists who agree to give up their valuable time and come and serve on these panels. So today's panel is on navigating publishing. And so the idea is to demystify the art of getting your papers into the right journals with the right fit, and how to address reviewer comments and so on. So this is especially hopefully useful to early career scientists. So first I'll do just a bit of introduction, and then we will dive into the questions. If people have a specific question, you may feel free to just raise your hand or put it in the chat, but I assure you there will be a time for questions overall at the end, around 20 minutes. And so that's the time when the floor is open for questions, and you can pose your questions to the panelists directly. All right, so with that, let me get started. I'm the panelist for today, and I'll be moderating this session. I'm Ajay Gopinathan, professor of physics and past chair of the Division of Biological Physics. And so our panelists today, we're very grateful to have, are all experts in the field of both science and publishing. So we start with Elizaveta Dubrovina, who's a senior editor at Nature Physics, and her background is in applied mathematics and fluid mechanics. She studied at the University of Cambridge and then obtained a PhD from Imperial College London, where she worked on the fluid dynamics of lab-on-chip devices with a focus on mostly analytical and numerical methods. So welcome, Elizaveta.
Thank you.
Yeah. And so next we have Alex Mogilner. So Alex is a professor of mathematics and biology at NYU Courant Institute and Department of Biology, where he develops theoretical and computational models to understand cell motility, division, cytoskeletal dynamics, and a host of other very interesting topics. He also serves as associate editor on the Biophysical Journal and is also on the editorial board of the Journal of Cell Biology. So welcome, Alex. And Alex, could you change your name actually? It says Ajay. So if you can actually, I don't know if you can change your name, but if you can't, this you can. Everybody knows who Alex is, so there's no confusion. But that is Alex.
Okay.
Yeah, it's okay if you can. I actually
No,
let me see.
right. No.
Maybe I can change. Yeah, so I'll do it. So that's fine. So the next we have Josh Shavitz, who is professor of physics and biophysics at Princeton University. And he's, of course, known for pioneering studies on many different topics, including single molecule systems, bacterial cell mechanics, bacterial motility, animal behavior, and so on. He's a co-director of the Center for Physics of Biological Function at Princeton, and he served as associate editor for both PRL and now more recently for our very own PRX Live. And then finally, we have Yelena Steich, is a senior editor at Science, where she handles physics, applied physics, computer science, and mathematics. She studied at the University of Belgrade and did her PhD in condensed matter at the University of Chicago. And so welcome to Yelena. And welcome to all the panelists, and thank you for being here. All right. So this is just going to get started. Let's see. So our first question, this is a question to all of you panelists. So it's a very general question. The question is, and I'll call out one by one each of you. So when you examine a new submission, the question is, what are the characteristics that tell you that this paper might be a good fit for our journal? So I'll start from left to right on my screen. So Josh, your first step.
To me, it has to be exciting. It has to be new. For PRX Life, it definitely has to deal with living something actually alive. but also has to at least be in the style of physics. Our definition of physics is very broad, but it needs to be recognizable in that sense.
All right. Sounds good. Yelena.
So science is a multidisciplinary journal, so we are looking for papers that have sort of broad journal appeal. Um, we are very aware that not all papers that some of our papers are pretty specialized. So the sort of the second alternative criterion is that they're of great importance for a narrower community. We're looking for also exciting papers that are sort of a big step forward. So sort of opposite of incremental, meaning that they have really moved the field ahead. We're looking for something that's sort of self-contained. In the sense that you're not going to like tomorrow publish the next slice of that
I
research
see.
in a different journal. We are looking a lot of papers that we publish are probably not that different, at least in physics, from those that are published in physics focused journals, but sometimes it's the interpretation that sets them apart. And
Mm,
therefore, it's very important that if the interpretation is especially exciting, that the data are really solid and support that interpretation. And sometimes it's clear from the start that that's not the case, and in that case, uh, such papers get rejected even at the before review, but often that requires a review process. It's in order for us to appreciate all these qualities of a paper that they also have to be well presented, and the part of that presentation is to put the research into context for the audience so that the audience knows what was done before and they can appreciate what you did to move the field. It is important that the figures are clear and well presented, and that you explain well what the implications of your research are. What is it that the people who read your paper and build on your research can do with it, and to be within while doing all that. You don't want to undersell your research, but you also don't want to overhype it. So sort of strike the right balance to do that. So while presentation, of course, is important, the really most important thing is the quality of your research, because presentations can be fixed.
right. Well, thanks, Elena. That's so I guess next up we have Elisaveta.
Hi. So we look for potential impact that would make the work attractive to a broad audience of physicists, so
Mm,
not just fellow specialists. So purely descriptive work that describes a particular behavior in a specific system will likely be seen incremental. For example, you could analyze how a particular protein arranges itself in the cellular structure and provide a very detailed description of the protein spacing on said structure and stop there. This would likely be seen as too specialized. But if you, let's say, look at this problem through a more general lens and identify a physical mechanism that determines the protein spacing that is distinct from, for example, a previously known biochemical mechanism, then this could be of interest. And if there are also indications that the general physical mechanism could be applicable to a different context and therefore have impact beyond the studied system, then even better. Of course, this is all very generalized, and this is not to say that we will
mm,
never
mhm.
not publish a description of a very cool new behavior.
Right. Sounds great. Thanks, Elisaveta. And now we have Alex, who'll talk a little bit more about society
Yeah,
journals, I
so
guess.
I'm an editor on two society journals, Biophysical Journal and Molecular Biology of the Cell. And for us, it's much easier than for like people who spoke before me. Uh, Incremental science, fine. We don't look for earth-shattering science, though of course we welcome it. So criterion is very simple. It should fit the topic of the journal. Like by physical journal, there has to be both biology and physics, right? Molecular biology of the cell, there should be molecular mechanisms and cell biology. Other than that, we look at is the interesting question asked. Uh, is the answer clear? Are the methods normal and making sense? So that's pretty much it. And the advantage for journals like that you will be reviewed most likely, and the reviewers will be your peers and not some mysterious things going on behind closed doors. I'm also on editorial boards of like Current Biology journal, Cell Biology. Those are more ambitious journals. So there, the big question, if you just want to figure out whether to submit there or not, is think about, do you think that wide audience wants to know it, right? Other than only narrowly, let's say, biophysical researchers. If you think that it's of more general interest, then definitely try. And then the last thing, it's kind of hard to define. It's a flavor, right? Each journal has certain flavor. Like Current Biology, for example, my favorite. It's hard to say like what separates it from other journals, but there's something. So this something, you simply have to read it regularly, and you'll get it. And if you see that your story fits this flavor, then do that.
Perfect. Thanks, Alex. So I guess from the panelists, we see there's a wide variety of options, uh, catering to different niches. And I think later on in the panel, we'll have a question about how to identify where you actually want to send your papers, and how it fits with what you're doing. All right. So the next questions, and the next few questions are going to be specifically directed to two people, one as main and another as follow-up. So the first question we have is about issues that you could fix pretty easily. So in your experience, if you could talk about what are the top 2 to 3 easily fixable issues, you're thinking about framing or fit or claims of novelty or how the statistics are presented. What are these issues that you could easily fix before you send that usually could change it from being a desk rejection instead becoming a send for review? So I think the question is to Elizaveta.
Yep. So here I'm thinking of papers that I desk rejected, but then were successfully appealed and published.
Okay, great.
So the main issue with these tends to be a lack of clarity and a lack of information about what exactly is new. And by this, I don't mean that you need to be hyping or overselling the main claims. Just describing your findings as extremely novel or hugely surprising isn't really going to do it. It's only going to detract from the message. But especially for Nature Physics, you do have to remember that the editor likely has not worked on your specific problem, neither have most of the reviewers, or let's say 1 or 2 of the 3 reviewers. So you do need to frame the scientific problem in the right context. Use the introduction to explain in a few paragraphs what has been done before and clearly communicate the main claims of the work in order to highlight the potential advance. So provides like specific information on how the work advances the field and fills gaps compared to previous attempts. Don't just say references X, Y, and Z have attempted to tackle this problem, but it remains unresolved. Tell us exactly what was missing in these references and how exactly your work is filling the gap. So for example, you developed a device that allows high resolution measurements of forces, and that allowed you to identify a physical mechanism that enables a particular biological function. And then as for in your conclusions, reiterate the main message and explain what your findings might mean for other systems beyond the studied system. Could this identified mechanism be generalized to something else?
All right, perfect. Sounds like framing novelty. So, Elena, oh, sorry, I'm sorry. Josh, you're the follow-up for this.
I agree the answer is clarity. And I think it's even simpler maybe than what Elizaveta said. If we can't understand based on a quick reading of your title and abstract in your cover letter what you did, that's not a good sign. And in my experience, there are really great scientists and there are really great writers, and the overlap is not 100%. And so the more you can do to make sure that the language in your initial submission is clear, the better it is, the easier it is for an editor to actually understand and make a good decision. And that definitely goes for the cover letter. We do read your cover letters. I know some people think we don't. We do. PRX Life and the PR journals in general are often looking to really move into new areas. So, we quantum computing applications to biology. I mean, there's all sorts of interesting directions that we'd like to go. But if it's not a normal thing that we do, you have to work extra hard in that cover letter to help us understand where it fits in a particular field, which reviewers might be appropriate. If you only list your best friends as reviewers, that's not a great sign. And it doesn't help us pick good things, especially if it's not in our normal wheelhouse. So those are additional things you might think about.
All right, perfect. Thanks, Josh. And thanks, Elizabeth. All right, so the next question is something I mentioned about before, was about thinking from the perspective of authors, about strategy, about where to submit and how to go about it. So the question is, how should authors judge journal fit and level realistically? So what's your advice for building kind of a submission strategy that's ambitious but also efficient? How should authors think about, I think it's about transfers to sister open access journals versus transfers to another journal, things of that sort. So I think this question is to Alex.
Yeah, so not an easy question. Of course, everybody want to go to Nature. If not Nature, Nature Physics. If not Nature Physics, PNAS. If not, then Biophysical Journal to the bottom of the list.
Well, there was also science, since Elena is here, Elman.
So how to decide? This is very hard because naturally we all overestimate ourselves by huge margins. We all think that we are geniuses and belong to nature, but the reality bites. So my advice, the best way to try to figure out where it belongs, run it by your colleagues and friends, and this is the hardest thing and one of the most important things we have to do in our career is to build a certain circle of trusted friends and colleagues. Trusted, what I mean is kind but realistic and honest. To me, one of the biggest difficulties in American academia, for example, is that everybody's so polite and nice, and it's very hard to find out if what they're saying is actually true. So, like, find people who tell you the truth. One of my tricks is I talk a lot to my Israeli colleagues, which are always straightforward, rude, and honest. So run it by them and ask them. So that's one thing. Another, always try to judge it from perspective of other people. Try to think like other people think and ask yourself, would those actual people find it very interesting and necessary to read in Nature? Right? So then there are all these side issues. One side issue which is super important is career, right? How fast you want the journal to be published. If you are on a like if you are a PI, then it's another matter. Of course, you need grants and you need promotions, you're a postdoc, you need your job and so on. So top journals, there's a big risk that it will be long and in the end it will be rejected. So think about how to juggle all those issues. Then some journals want cool methods. So ask yourself what the methods you use in your paper. Are they trendy? Are they cool? Or are they more traditional? And I would say don't compromise. If whatever you use, don't try to hype it up and pretend that it's more cool. And the last part, the transfer issues. Again, difficult thing. I would say be very clear of what transfer means. If this transfer is actually using the same reviewers and the same reviews, then very often it makes sense. If it's just a scam, which is unfortunately very frequent these days, that it still will be sent to out to reviews, maybe to new reviewers. Why do it? You simply let someone make money on your back, so then don't do it. So it's really, it depends on where you transfer and what the transfer process is.
Perfect. Thanks, Alex. Yelena, if you have any follow-up, feel free to add in.
Yeah, I agree with talking to our colleagues and sort of getting outside opinions, and you present your research usually in conferences before you submit it to a journal, and you can get some feedback there too, see how it's received, how much excitement it generates. If you're targeting a particular journal, look at what they published, see if the papers that it doesn't necessarily mean the topic needs to be similar, but just the type of paper that you're submitting. See what they have published in the past. Think about the most important thing is really think about the audience, like who's going to be interested in your paper. Is it a really broad swath of the scientific public, then send it to Science or Nature. If it's more physics focused, send it to a more physics focused journal. Think about when you're submitting to a family of journals, again, it just depends on which family and how many sort of levels there are in different families. Think about where you would if you would be happy ending up in a sort of lower ranked journal within that family, and some journals ask you where do you want to transfer it when you submit, and then you have to kind of think from the outset where what your ultimate goal is for that paper. And as Alex said, it's some transferring with reviews can speed things up, because then the reviewers are already there, and maybe they are already recommending a sister journal. So then there is not much for the receiving journal to do if they decide to reuse those reviews, but there is never a guarantee that that's the case. And sometimes it can be helpful to transfer to another journal because you will get a fresh start and you will not be burdened by possibly reviews that you think are unfair or are harming your chances of publication in some way. There's also just a question of like funders and publishing models, and does your funder require open access of a certain kind? What is it that can sometimes limit your options in terms of publication? So those are all things to consider.
All right, perfect. Thanks, Elena. All right, so now we move on to a question about narrative. So the question is, this is actually meant for Josh, is the main question. So the question is, how do you frame a compelling narrative in a scientific paper without resorting to hype? So there's been some talk about hype already. In which aspects of the paper do you most often see the narrative breakdown, and how would you recommend strengthening it?
I will start by saying I agree with Alex that we all think what we do is the best thing that's ever been done. I actually don't think that's such a bad thing. That is what drives us as scientists. If we didn't think that, we probably wouldn't be doing all the science that we do. So I don't want to dispel you from that. But when you write up the science, you then have to put it in the context of what's out there. And so there's a big difference between portraying your excitement and why you think it's important and how it fits in the field, versus hype with is mostly a lot of buzzwords or words with EST at the end, claims of precedence, which aren't particularly scientific or useful, in fact. And so I think you just can delete all of those clauses or words, and almost the thing will write itself in that sense. Narrative is a complex structure because, right, it's supposed to span the entire paper. And different journals have different formats in which they make you put the sections or whatever. But in my mind, a scientific paper should be a single narrative that reads like a story. It tells you what the problem is, why it hasn't been solved, what you did about it, what you learned, and maybe what might come next, or how this has changed our thinking. And if you can keep that single arc in your paper going, I think you'll have a good chance at success at having readers understand what you did and why you did it. It's hard to do in what we do. There's a lot of details, there's a lot of nitpicking, but if you can maintain that thread, the high level thread throughout, I think you have a winner in that sense.
Perfect. Thanks, Josh. And I think a follow-up is for Alex, if you have anything to add.
Yeah, so I think one thing I want to mention, Josh, I think already touched on it. One idea per paper. That's, I think, the golden rule. Do not cram it with too many things. Another, I think, important thing is to set expectations right in the introduction. So the introduction is very important. It tells people what you're gonna say, and if you do it right, it sets the excitement. And then do not forget what you said in the introduction. Do not deviate too much from it. Another thing I think also mentioned by Josh, do not overinterpret, do not overhype. Everything has to fit together, like level of excitement should fit the level of result. Do not create too much excitement if you cannot back it up. Then there's also field-specific things. Like, for example, if you do mathematical modeling or physical modeling, there always will be questions. How do you get parameters of your models? Did you make prediction with your model? Did you test the prediction? So you have to check all those boxes. Another important point is consider alternatives. Like there's lots of papers that immediately narrow down on a certain explanation, certain possibility, and go with it without considering alternative explanation, alternative approaches that normally triggers reviewers and the readers to question whether it's the right thing or the authors simply like do the wishful thinking. So always consider alternatives very carefully and honestly. And the last thing I wanted to mention at that point is do not try to guess what reviewers will say or what the readers will think. Just go with your vision and try your luck.
Oh, awesome. Thanks, Alex. I think we have a question about guessing what reviewers think later on. So I'll come back to you on that. The next question is about figures, which is, an important part of our papers and which we agonize about for a while. So the question, this is for Elena, and then follow up with Elisaveta. The question is, what is your ideal figure strategy for a submission in the sense that what makes a figure set feel impactful rather than just incremental? What are your best, practices that you've seen? What do you think works well? Say, Elena.
I guess I will start by saying that figures can only be as impactful as your research is. So it's again an anti-hype statement. But I guess there are different tastes in figures. Some people like for figures to be sort of self-contained so that you can basically you don't have to read the actual paper in order to understand what's happening. Some people see figures as being more of an aid to understanding the paper. I'm kind of in the second camp. But generally, there are some journals that require, and some authors submit such figures anyway. As figure 1, they submit like a sort of a schematic of, for example, if it's an experimental paper, a schematic of the experiment, of the method, and even like sort of the most important results right away. And that's again sort of catering a little bit to those with shorter attention spans. So that can be useful. It's not, I don't, if the number of figures is limited, I think that does take away from the information that you're able to convey. So I wouldn't not say at all that it's mandatory, but some journals and some readers like that sort of figure as a sort of helping them to, in a quick way, understand what the paper is about. Another thing is that figures can be overwhelming. We use them because they convey a lot of information at once. but that can also be sort of a double-edged sword, because you can cram so much information that it's too much. And then, so one piece of advice would be to sort of pick and choose what panels you want to show in the main text versus the supplementary. If something is indeed only supporting and is important for the method but not for the result, maybe you should put it in the supplementary, and organize your figures around kind of think about your figures as chapters in your narrative, so that each sort of section of a paper corresponds to a figure. So each figure, try to organize each figure around a particular theme or a particular part of the message that you're trying to convey. That's again because of the limit of the number of figures. It's not always possible, but kind of that's the ideal, at least to me. Another thing is that people invest a lot of energy into the figure itself, but they forget about the caption, and they go together. And you really have to be make sure that the figures are professional, in the sense that you can understand what's in the figure. You see beautiful illustrations, and you don't know what's illustrated because people don't say what the different pieces are. The same thing with graphs. You see graphs without, like a 2D color plot without the color bar. You see, units that are wrong, or that they're arbitrary units where it should have been actual numbers, so that the reviewers can assess what you did. If you process your data, people forget things like renormalized curves, or curves where the background is subtracted. Things like that need to be explained, and those explanations may need to be in the supplementary, but you need to say in the figure in the caption what you did to your data. So that's a one important part of the data, is not just presentation, but also sort of honesty about what you did, and the making sure that the reviewers can understand what's actually being shown. So some of the things can be fixed in revision, and we fix a lot of those things in sort of when we edit the paper before publication, but it's really very helpful to have that right from the start.
Thanks, Elena. I think follow up, Elisabetta, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I completely agree with Elena. The figures are only as good as the paper, so I've never chosen whether to reject or send an article to review based on figures alone. The figures are there to visually support the main concepts and sort of showcase the data in the clearest way possible. So they're not supposed to be impactful in their own right. However, they should be clear. They should help understanding rather than confuse the reader further. So again, I would suggest just really focus on clarity here. Make sure the caption describes all the elements in the figure. I can understand that if you worked on a particular system for so long, it becomes obvious to you, but maybe show it to someone else and they'll surely point out certain things that you haven't labeled. And then just kind of quite basic things that you might forget. Use symbols and colors that are clearly distinct for different elements. Don't use magenta and pink for adjacent data points. And also don't crowd the figure with too many panels. And yeah, ideally you should be able to understand the figure from the caption without having to delve into the main article. So be as clear as possible. For us, for example, the word limit on the caption is very long, so that's there for a reason.
All right. Perfect. Thanks. And next question is actually for you as well. So this is now we are going into reviewers. And so the question is, I think we have addressed some of the typical red flags that you see at the initial submission stage. But then the question is about, in your experience, what are the typical fixable red flags that reviewers tend to pick up on? Of course, a very general question, but if there are things that typically happen that authors could address beforehand, that would be great. And what essentially is your advice for authors to preempt some of these typical fixable criticisms? So, Elizabeth.
I feel I'm kind of giving the same answer to everything and
Oh,
saying
that's
clarity.
fine. Yeah, the question.
But it does come up a lot that A really common thing that comes up in the reviews is you haven't placed the study in the right context.
Mhm.
Key references are missing or are not discussed, so reviewers simply can't really assess the advance, especially if they're sort of from a slightly different field. So make sure you cite all previous work and clearly explain the advance of your work over these previous attempts and be specific. And another thing that comes up a lot is sort of using trendy terms or wacky acronyms. So when I speak to authors at conferences, I get the feeling that many assume that editors, especially at nature journals, expect the authors to come up with a catchy name or an elaborate acronym with a popular science kind of flavor. And that's really not necessary. So and reviewers almost always pick up on this and ask the authors to use clearer terminology so as not to obscure the main message. And on that note, do explain any existing specialized terminology or acronyms that you are using. Again, like you will have seen them for years and years, but someone coming into the field will not know what something is. So it's especially important in biological physics as the interdisciplinarity means that your paper is likely to be read by at least one reviewer that is not from your general discipline. So obviously don't dumb it down, but don't be afraid of over explaining things. And finally, do state your limitations clearly, because if you don't, it will almost certainly come up in review.
Right. That's great. Yeah, that's an important point. So Alex, anything follow up?
Yeah, so I agree with all that Elizaveta said. Um, mm, I want to stress also the attention to citations, to the references, other than like giving the fair picture of the field. It's very important to think who you cite and why. I would say like try to cite all the relevant people, which of course requires knowledge of the field, because let's face it, it's still very much about people and uh, think about possible reviewers, and you definitely have to cite possible reviewers, which requires a lot of guesswork. Um, then, of course, the super typical fixable red flag is think about whether your conclusions actually match the results. Don't overinterpret, don't underinterpret, like everything should fit. And then there's lots of very field specific things, like if there's modeling, if there's some physical theory, ask whether you make your model to make predictions and whether this prediction is tested. If there's actual biological system, think about what lazy reviewers will say. They always say, well, did you test it in vitro? Did you show that this thing works in different types of cells? So I said before that don't try to guess what reviewers will say, but there are certain things that all reviewers nowadays are saying, and you don't have to necessarily do all that, but think about like how to write it so that this kind of comment would not be completely damning. And last thing I wanted to mention, it's kind of subtle, and it also bears on this difference between trendy glamour journals and normal journals. Whether what you are saying is fits with what we know, or is it contrary to what we know? There's always this very subtle boundary, like when you say something completely revolutionary, you jeopardize yourself, or is it something obvious? So it's very tricky to find the boundary. And here, of course, I'm not talking about the actual science, which has to be honest, and it is what it is. But how you present it, try to find this very subtle balance between not triggering people and hyping it too much, but also do not make it completely mundane.
All right. Yes, perfect. Thanks, Alex. Yeah, so this is actually a question that's sort of a follow-on, which is now that you have your review referee reports, how do you recommend dealing with them? How do you recommend handling things that are kind of hard to do, which are like reviews that are conflicting with each other, for example, unreasonable requests. I think Alex mentioned some of those. And then what if you have a fundamental disagreement with the reviewer? So this question is for Elena.
So I kind of like to say that the sort of peer review process is kind of stuck in the 19th century because you have this very slow, very traditional process where people write to each other and then wait for months to receive a response, and they forget in the meantime what they did and what the paper is about if they're reviewers. So this process starts with reading the reviews carefully, and just as like reviewers can be biased against authors, authors also have a bias against reviewers because they're being attacked, and obviously they're being in some cases if the reviewer is negative and they're somebody is attacking the thing that they love most in the world, and obviously that's produces an emotional response. So one thing is to read the reviews carefully, take a breath, read them again, share them with your group. Just try to view, to put yourself in the shoes of the reviewer and see what realistically could you have done something better, or could you have presented your research better in order for this misunderstanding, for example, or confusion or error not to have occurred. So kind of think with kindness about reviewers and what they did, and try not to sort of try to assume best intentions, and then go from there, and then draft your response in the way that is courteous and that does. If you notice misunderstandings or errors, that do point out those misunderstandings or errors, but in a way that is professional and collegial. So this is important because your response will you don't really know who's going to read that response. It's going to go to all the editors, reviewers. If for some reason the paper turns out problematic, it may end up being posted on the internet, for example, and it's everybody knows who the author of that response is, and so be mindful that people that you're not intending will to read response may read it. Another thing, as far as the actual problems in the review, such as conflicting recommendations, another that's where the editor comes in. So you have a person who is at least nominally impartial, who can mediate between reviewers and authors. And in case that you're getting one reviewer is sort of tugging in one direction and the other is tugging in the other direction, you can talk to your editor before you even write a response and say, well, what should I do? Should I listen to one? Or should I try to sort of appease both? Or what is more important to you in order for this paper to get to the point where it can be published? Another thing is, and the same thing for unreasonable requests. If you have to explain why they're unreasonable. Maybe they're unreasonable because it will take you years to take the data that or months, depending on how quickly you're aiming to publish a paper. To take the data that the reviewer wants you to take, or maybe it's just impossible to do it with current tools and that sort of thing. But it's very important to be clear and in your response to write precisely why the request is unreasonable. And then once you've sort of done all this thinking process, again, talk to your group, and it's important that the response be representation of the entire author group and not just the corresponding author. So that's sort of one thing to think about.
Perfect. Thanks, Helena. And the follow-up is for Josh. Do you have anything to add to that?
So I'd like to separate objective from subjective comments and reviews. Subjective things, I think, you just do your best. So for example, this isn't exciting. Like you can't argue that with facts, right? Because exciting is not a factual concept. So you do your best. For objective things, I think getting your editor on your side for certain things is a good idea. There's different kinds of conflicting reports. If one says you need to do this and the other says you need to do that, and they're like just not even on the same axis, then I think it is useful to ask the editor if they would value one or the other. If instead one is like, I like this, and the other one says, no, it has to be this way, you can kind of use that to your advantage and say, well, this reviewer liked it, and you put that in the rebuttal, and that can be positive. I will say at PRX Life, we have a collaborative review process where the reviewers, after they submit the reviews, are asked to read the other ones and then work out any differences. And this often does iron out at least small seeming conflicts. They're usually not really conflicts, but they could have seemed like conflicts. But we do sometimes have it where one reviewer says, oh, I made a mistake. You're right. I read that other review. I thought about it and I was off track. And that will save the authors a lot of headache. So I think that's a very positive thing. Unreasonable requests, I think whether you go to the author, the editor or not depends on how unreasonable it is. I think if you can just say, this would require $1 million machine we don't own in 6 months, you can just say that. Whether the reviewer is okay with that is fine. You don't need to go to the editor. But if it's a little bit more on the boundary, you could try to go to the editor and say, I think we can address all of this, but this one thing is just, it's too long for us to do, and see what they say. And if, they rubber stamp that, then I think you're good to go. And then you mentioned fundamental disagreements. Well, this is a conversation. It is up to you to try to persuade the reviewers to beat them down, etc. And that's the game that we play.
Excellent. Sounds great. Okay, that brings us to the end of our, like longer questions. And so all we have now is like a lightning round. So I'm going to just ask a quick fire set of questions. And it's open to all of you. So I'll just call out one by one and then maybe take 15, 20 seconds if you want to give an answer. Or you can pass as well if that's already been covered. All right. So the first question in the lightning round is on your AI stance. So what is your AI policy or stance in a nutshell? So the question, Alex?
Not an easy question. I am oscillating between outrage and admiration. I think if it's used judiciously, it's great, and in the future, it's absolutely inevitable. The main thing is to keep a person in the loop. Don't just like submit something without thinking about it and rewriting it.
Right. Perfect. Josh?
So APS has an official policy that basically says you are allowed to use AI to help you write, but you must disclose that in the cover letter, and you could disclose it in the paper as well if you want. We don't have an AI coding policy. It is up to you what you do with that. We forbid AI generated or modified images of any kind. So that's an outright thing. And then the official policy at APS is reviewers are not allowed to upload the manuscripts anywhere and use AI to review. In my opinion, that is uniformly ignored, but that is the policy.
All right. Thanks, Josh. Helena?
Our policy is very similar to APS's, so you can use it, but you have to declare it. It does actually have to be in the paper, and you have to say what the prompt was.
Okay.
So a little more, but as far as figures and reviewers, it's the same as APS.
Perfect. And Elisabetta?
Yeah, we don't support the use of AI for generating manuscripts, and yeah, we don't allow reviewers to upload papers to chatbots.
So, okay, pretty much the same. All right, excellent. Something which we struggle with, referee recommendations and exclusions. So how do you view these recommendation and exclusion lists, and are there any good strategies? So Alex?
I would say exclusion, be very careful and limited with it. If you recommend too many people to exclude it, it does look bad, and it's something means that something is wrong. Reviewers suggested super important because in many journals, that's like the reviewers who are asked to review. Keep in mind that those people are not necessarily friendly. In my vast experience, Many of them will write very critical reviews, but really suggest who you think are the best experts to review it. Don't suggest too few, don't to suggest too many. So those are obvious things.
Perfect. Josh.
I think I have the same comments. Don't suggest all your buddies as reviewers. Really do suggest the people you think would do a good job. And yeah, excluding people, I really don't think you should do it unless you really think someone cannot judge your work fairly, or or something. Because that's my personal opinion.
Elena.
Yeah, I think excluding too many people can be very dangerous because, especially in fields that are very specialized, and it becomes difficult to find people to review your paper in the first place, and it just becomes basically impossible to publish in those circumstances. And as far as the suggestions, there's sort of two types of authors. One will suggest their friends, another will suggest the really the best experts, and it's even though we rarely use more than one of the suggested referees, it sort of sets a tone when you look at what the author suggested. I just always appreciate those who suggest the best experts more.
Perfect. And Elisaveta.
We do always honor the author's wish to exclude a reviewer, but it's usually one or two at most. Don't exclude the whole lab. People have done it. That's just not helpful, and it does look bad. And recommendations can be very helpful, especially for cases when the originally assigned reviewers, for example, did not deliver and we need to start from scratch. And so the help is appreciated, but don't suggest your friends, don't suggest those in the acknowledgements or your previous collaborators, because we can't use those. And I would say don't suggest the top expert in the field, because we likely already know that person, or they're too busy. So it's just doesn't help us.
Right. Yeah, so that's one thing I was going to follow up with was about the busyness level of people, seniority versus junior. So yeah, you addressed that. All right, thanks. I think we'll have one last quick fire question to wrap it up, which is, what is your one, if you had one thing that you'd recommend, one high impact practice like pre-submission inquiry, and I think you mentioned already pre-review by colleagues. What is it that you would recommend authors to do? So I'll start with Elisaveta.
Yeah, let someone who's not an expert in the topic read your paper, especially for such an interdisciplinary field. It can be really helpful. And the other thing is, if you see an editor at the conference, go speak to them because it can be very
Okay. All right. Sounds good. Elena.
Yeah, I was also going to suggest talking to somebody who's not in your field, especially for multidisciplinary journals. It's just it gives you a sort of an opinion that's not. It gives you a different perspective that will help you improve the presentation, and also just generally do better to share your data and dare say it codes. I think that's just a helpful practice in general for the community, and it also helps the review process.
All right. Josh.
I agree with what they've said. I'm going to say something to the younger folks who maybe haven't written papers before. Go in a room by yourself, close the door, and read it out loud. I'm very serious. It's a weird activity, but if this is your first time, you will see funny ways you've said things and stuff. You'll see more by doing that than scanning through the same document on Overleaf that you've looked at for 3 months straight.
Great suggestion. Make sure nobody sees you. Anyway, I'm just kidding. Alex.
Yeah, pre-review by colleagues, and
Yes,
but the circle of those colleagues has to be carefully cultivated and thought through.
Right. Perfect. I think on that note, we come to the end of our questions, so we'll open it up. We don't have too much time, unfortunately, but we'll open it up to questions from the audience if there are any. You can just put it in the chat and I can read it out. Might be the easiest thing to do. But if people, let's see if there are any questions. Let's see. Hopefully I'm looking in the right place. Okay, there's a question about best advice for independent researchers outside of academia. All right, I'll let whoever wants to take this question take it. So maybe Josh.
I don't think there's anything different.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
I
Science is
agree. Yeah,
science, no matter where you are.
yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, it's a question about how do you judge novelty specifically?
The
Yes, it's
old-fashioned answer, go to the library, which doesn't mean the same thing anymore, but that's it. You have to read.
okay. Uh, okay, so specific question about the length of time for publication. So why does it take considerably long time for publication in Nature or Science? There's a question about the process. What is usually the cause of the delay? I mean, I guess. So I'll ask Elena and Elisaveta to chime in on this.
Well, I think that the question is more about, how likely your paper is to be. I think this is possibly based on the comment that Alex made. That I think that the reason is that it's just riskier to. The advice was that it's when you submit a paper to a higher impact journal, that it's just a riskier process because it will be scrutinized in a way that for novelty and for sort of impact in the way that it is not in sort of the more focused journals, and that can add just revision rounds and review rounds that maybe are not there for more focused journals.
All right. Excellent. There's one more question, two more, I think. One about uh, how you got into your roles as editors. So I think I mean, we have kind of professional editors as well as associate editors. So it's slightly different. So maybe I'll pick one from each. So maybe Elena, you could talk about your path, and then maybe Alex.
So I was basically like Jay said at the beginning. So my PhD was in physics, and was in hard condensed matter physics. I sort of did something a little biologically related in my postdocs, and then when I was sort of thinking about, well, gee, I've done two postdocs, what should I do next? It just happened that there was an ad in the back of Physics Today, which I answered, and then I got hired. So it was unfortunately not something that, because there was a lot of serendipity involved, it's not a very general career advice, but nowadays there are more journals, and it's definitely that was like 15 years ago, 16 years ago, so that there are more options for people who want to go into professional editorial roles. And it's certainly one way to stay close to academia and stay close to research, but not actually do research. And there are many advantages to that in terms of, what your goal is professionally and how you want to organize your life. So it's definitely a viable career path, and it's yeah.
Perfect. Thanks. Alex, how about how
Yeah, so
what?
I'm a non-professional editor, and I just was asked to become one. And I would say that it's extremely rewarding service, and also one of rare meaningful services, like compared to university committees, for example. And it also looks great on CV, so definitely try to be one. And the thing to do is simply, go to conferences, cultivate ties with your colleagues, like do not decline to review, write good reviews, and gradually people will get to know you and will invite you to be an editor of something.
No, perfect. All right. And so I think more we have one time for one last question. There's a question about which is close to my own heart, which is publishing theory only papers. So I guess I'll
I
ask
say,
Josh.
so
Yeah.
Farjay, come to APS. We have more theory than experiment. I will say, in relation to the previous question, I started editing at PRL because I complained to the chief editor that there wasn't enough experiment in
Ah.
biophysics in PRL, and he said, "Well, I have a job for you." Uh, but yeah, definitely APS. We have plenty of theory only papers in all of our journals, so come to us, and we are happy to take them.
All right, we'll take
Uh,
your
I
your
wanted
word
to
for it.
add that
Alex.
I wanted to add that get to know the journals. For example, molecular biology of the cell, despite being mainly experimental journal, it does take theory only papers. So just look at the journals and see which journals do publish theory only papers.
Hmm. Yeah. Sounds perfect. All right. Okay, I guess on that note, we've come to the end of our time, unfortunately, but we could have great conversations forever. And could even have another session on, publishing models and open access and things like that, which we did not get into today. But thank you again to all our panelists, Alex, Josh, Elena, and Elisaveta, for contributing their valuable time. Thank you for all our viewers who joined us today. And as I mentioned before, the recording will be posted on our Engage website, and I put that link in the chat earlier. All right, so thank you again to everyone, and have a good rest of your day, and keep publishing. So,
Bye, everybody.
all right, bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, thanks, Elizabeth.